Hello, Alex Lafkus here. I just want to kind of quickly go over some of the stuff I'm looking at when setting up my streamer gear. Um, there's a lot of people who have some questions, just kind of curious about, you know, what kind of gear, what are you looking at? I want to get started in streamer fishing, whatever it is. So typically, I'm a big fan of 9 foot rods. I run the Sage stuff. I think they make great rods. Typically the R8 because my casting stroke is kind of slowed down. I'd say I only like the really, really fast rods in high wind conditions. So like the Igniter, what used to be the Method, that's what I like in the high wind conditions. The R8 Salt is a little different. It's more geared, those saltwater rods have a little softer tip on a lot of their stuff. And that's because most of their streamers are a little smaller. So if you're throwing, a lot of 2 to 4 inch lightly weighted stuff, those saltwater rods are good. When you switch to the bigger flies, they tend to have a little less control because the tip is a little softer for delicate presentations with smaller streamers. Um, I'm a 9 foot rod guy. If you're doing a lot of dredging, long leaders, floating lines, and you're trying to get dead drifts, I could see why you would go to a longer rod. Personally, I do not like the tapers. They seem like they get usually doggier in the tips versus a 9 foot rod, which most of the tapers are designed around having a 9 foot rod. So as you extend it, it gets a little softer. As you shorten them, they tend to get a little quicker. 9 foot just seems to be the best for me. The short rods I ran for a long time, and it seemed like I had to do a lot of force casting, and they were really quick, and it seemed like it was harder on my shoulder, which I have issues with. So I'm really into the 9 foot rod thing. If you think, oh, a small rod will help me in a littler river, to some degree, if you can get a soft one, like I have an old 8 foot, like 6 weight, it's probably more of a 5, that I don't mind running, but it is a softer rod. So in that condition, it works a little bit better than a 9 footer. But typically, you're going to be roll casting in those tight environments anyway. So as long as you get good at a roll cast, you're not going to be limited presentation wise based on your length of rod. So I'm going to do a 9 foot rod. Typically, I'm 6, 7, 8. I have 9s for really big stuff and really windy days. But for the most part, I'm talking river trout fishing. It's going to be a lot of 6, 7, 8. 7's kind of your tweener size where it might not perform as well on giant flies as an 8 weight, but it'll handle, to the large size of smaller flies, say 4 and 5 inchers, better than a 6 weight. If I were to buy one and I was just trout fishing, it would probably be a 7 weight. But shop around. A lot of the 7s are more towards a 6 than an 8. I like the 7s that are properly, more towards the 8 side of life. Which there's some good ones out there. R8's always a good choice. I haven't played with a ton of the other rods. I'm sure there's a bunch of other good ones out there, but that's just what I've been running. So whatever. So when we go to reel, I like a lighter reel. I like a lighter reel because usually you're casting a lot. And if you have a heavy reel back there, that'll tire you out more. So I go to light stuff. Like Lamson had made some really light stuff. I'm sure Ross does. I'm sure Abel's. I kind of more lean towards inexpensive reels or less expensive reels that I can have multiple spare spools for. I've been running the Sage Spectrum LTs. These are super light. This is an 8 weight size. So they're super light. They're easy. One thing I like about them is, and I like it on a lot of these streamer reels, what I want to find is something that doesn't really free spool super easily. This one does a little bit, so I can gather line if I need to, if I'm getting a fish to the reel. But if you're casting a long line, you don't want it to reel up that line as you're fishing all day. I've had some reels, I think the old 4200 series Sages did that a little bit more. The 3 tans, that was kind of my knock on them, is like you'd start creeping in line and you'd have to pull more out. So I like them to have a little more resistance going forward so that that length of line you have out stays out. Yeah, Spectrum LT, just go around and feel them. I didn't like the standard Spectrums. I actually had one and was like, get rid of that. That's just too heavy. It was too much. So I went to the Spectrum LTs. They're not super cheap, but they're not $600. You can get one of these and a couple of spools, you know, for about what a high-end reel would cost. And I would recommend doing that. I saw, you know, some guide on the PM the other day, like with fancy reels, unspooling a line to put a new line on because, you know, conditions weren't what he expected. And I'm sitting there like, I mean, there's an hour, 45 minutes and a mess, you know, versus having 1, 2, 3 different lines for your one reel. And look, we're not fishing. Even with steelhead, you're probably not going to blow the drags out on this. I understand if you're in saltwater, but even then, you're talking permit, tuna, bonefish, tarpon, you know, like things that are going to really smoke a drag. A lot of your snook and reds, you don't really have to worry about burning a drag out. They're going to be more short range fighters like smallmouth and stuff like that, not smoking drags and burning things up. So a lot of these Spectrum LTs will do fine for it. When it comes to lines, I don't really think it matters when you're running a 6 or an 8. I kind of lean towards, you know, 3 lines. I like, you're going to want to have a floater for most of them, whether you're using it for streamers or not. You're going to end up with a floater. So topwater. Also for streamers, sometimes you get in situations where you're fishing like a lot of really low water, like say maybe in the winter, where fish are moving, they're really lethargic and you're fishing weighted flies to try to feed them. You're going to want a floating line. And in that case, you can run a little bit longer leader, like an 8-footer, maybe 9 if you're really fishing deep, and fish it really slow without worrying about the line hanging up. That's one of the big things is like you can fish long pauses with the sink tip, but that's when the line starts hanging up on the bottom. So I like to have a floating line for some of those situations. Maybe an intermediate would be fine too. But if I'm just kind of looking at having sort of the bare minimum, I would have a floater included in it. Then I would have like a standard type 6, 24 to 30 foot line. On my 8 weights in big rivers, I like the Rio Striper. Like I said, I'm sure there's other good lines out there. Didn't really like the airflow lines. They sink too fast for what I like. What I find is with those airflows is you cannot pause the fly long enough sometimes to trigger fish without the line hanging bottom. So I like the Rio Stripers. You can even run the Rio DCs, like their standard 24-foot heads. Those have a floating runner. The Stripers have an intermediate runner. The intermediate, this striper line does sink pretty quick, but it's not to the point you can't stall your fly. I've gotten a lot of my clients over the years. I fished a little bit differently where I incorporate a few more pauses in my retrieves and kind of line up my presentation to do that. So they couldn't do it with the airflows, and when I got them switched over to the Rios, they're seeing what I'm talking about and catching more fish. Some of them complain. Some of the Rios kind of come out maybe twisted. I haven't had a huge issue, but just casting it out, dragging it behind the boat, whatever you got to do, you'll get it out of there and they'll work fine. But they do take a little maintenance. If you're casting 5,000 times in a day with a wind-resistant fly that's twisting everything, you can put a swivel in there all you want. It's not going to help. You're going to start twisting. So you just kind of got to do the maintenance. Make sure you're casting all of your line out, at some point in the day. If you're close to it and it's not all the way out, I'd like to throw it out and then just kind of shake the last few feet out and shake it a little and start stripping. Because what happens is you're pulling on that line or stopping your cast, all the twists end up catching up between the reel and your hand or the first guide. So that's when you ball it up. So you want to get that line out. You won't have an issue with it. On my 6 weight, I run the 24-foot 150. They don't make a striper in it, which is fine because usually the 6 weight I'm fishing a little smaller stuff in a smaller river. And then the next line, so if I had to have 2, that's probably what I would do, is a floater and like your standard 24 to 30 foot sink tip. I personally really like having a Type 3 as well. So the Type 3 that I probably like the most right now that is available, well, it's almost available. SA is making one that they've made for Russ. It's with the SA Cold 25 runner, I believe. And you've heard me talking about this for bass and everything else. The runner's a little supple, so I don't like it much in the summer. It's gonna twist on, it's gonna like knot up on your guide and stuff like that. It's just a soft runner, but in anything that's a little cooler, you know, when you start getting in the 50s, 60s, 40s, like it's a great line for that. 70s, 80s, not the biggest fan of it. And at that point, you might actually look at a saltwater line if you're doing a lot of summertime bass in 80, 90 degree weather. That's kind of what I've liked is more the saltwater, harder finished tropic lines for that kind of condition. So I run the Type 3. The one they quit making that is kind of sad was the 15-foot Type 3. I understand a lot of people didn't like it. It cast a lot like a dry fly line, so you couldn't just flop it out there. You know, a lot of sink tips, you don't have to cast really good to make it work. So they just kind of flop it, and that the weight of the head will take it. This is like a line you need to double haul, and it will cast really well if you have a good clean double haul. One thing that I would recommend is in between uses, or, you know, every few days, if your line stops shooting like you want, get yourself a cheap bottle of Russ Peaks line dressing and clean your lines. You'll be surprised at how much dust comes off of it and dirt, especially if you're standing in a boat, standing on it. You put a coating of this on or two, and it's going to cast like a new fly line again. So, you know, it's something that I really recommend you do. And you'll, I don't know if it'll last longer in the long run, but it'll fish better throughout the process. There's some silicone-based stuff out there, whatever. This Russ Peaks has been around forever. It's safe on all lines. Cheap. Almost every fly shop's got it. I think it's like $10. It's going to last you multiple years. But clean your lines. You'll love it when you do. You'll be surprised you didn't do it more frequently. So when I go from my fly line to my leaders, I am not running giant leaders. I'm not running short leaders. I like that in between. Usually on my 8 weights, I'm fishing bigger rivers. So I'm doing more of like a 6 to 7 foot leader. I really like the Maxima Chameleon. This stuff lasts a long time. It's stiff as can be. So with my 8s and 9s, I'm usually doing, and I have this stuff because I use it to troll for muskies, but so I have 40 pound, 30 pound. Usually I'll go to like a 25, because I think that 30 to 20 jump is huge. So I think I add the 25, 20, and I'm just doing like kind of like a foot each. So I'm at about 4 feet right there. And then I go to Sniper FC. This Sunline stuff is super stiff. It's good fluorocarbon. And you'll want to do that crazy Alberto knot that I've talked to you about before in some other videos between your fluorocarbon and your Maxima Chameleon. That knot's going to hold for you. Take some time, practice it, you know. I think I like to do 6 wraps each way. When you see the crazy Alberto knot, you'll understand. It's almost like a Albright knot, but you go up 6 and back 6 and through the hole the opposite way. Man, you get used to tying that knot. That knot does not fail. That is an excellent knot, and it's not super hard to tie. So we're doing the carbon to the Maxima Chameleon. Like I said, maybe 18 inches of the fluoro on the end. You start getting too long, and all of a sudden your cast doesn't want to turn over. I know some people just run straight whatever. Look, your line's going to turn over. When you taper it down, it's going to turn over a lot better. So on my 6 weights, I tend to go like 25, 20, 15 or 18, whatever I happen to have laying around. It doesn't really matter. And then down to like, you know, whatever size you want to run. 12, 10, 8-pound carbon. Once again, doing the crazy Alberto between your Maxima and your fluorocarbon. And then as you go to that 8-pound, you're going to need more wraps each way going from your Maxima to your carbon. Just practice the knot at home a little bit. It's a phenomenal knot. I always just have a few already pre-tied, because when I get in the boat with clients, usually, you know, they got something there, and I'd just rather go with what I know and what I have. Maxima does make these like 27-yard spools, so they're really easy to carry around in your boat bag. But that's kind of all I really wanted to cover today. I just want to give you guys like a brief overview on lines, leaders, that sort of stuff. It makes my life easier, and I think it'll make yours too if you're just not guessing a ton. But so basically, 3 lines, a few different spools, a leader with some tippet, and you're good. 3 lines will really cover you through about 99% of your fishing situations. I will say for my floating lines, I don't really like the heavy aggressive tapers that they run on like a lot of the newer bass bug tapers, stuff like that. There's 2 things. I don't like the impact when it hits, and also if you're fishing swift or current, and this goes for all types of lines. Like some of the big Rio Predator stuff has a big runner. That's fine. It's thick, meaning thick runner, not just big. But when you're fighting fish in heavy current, that big thick runner is really a pain to work around with fish. So I use like Rio Golds for my floating lines for streamers. Now I know some people are like, well, those don't cast. Look, just work on the cast. It's fine. The line works great. You can throw giant mouse patterns on it in the middle of the night on an 8-weight. Just get a good clean double haul. This line from SA is a little thinner runner, which I like for fighting fish and casting. And same with this Rio striper line. So that's kind of a big thing for me is you don't want those thick runners and heavy current. They're going to cost you fish. I think that's everything. Like, subscribe, keeps me motivated, and I appreciate it. Feel free to comment anything in the bottom to just kind of whatever other questions pop into your head. I'm going to try to stay on this more and more. I'm working on it, and hopefully we're getting some useful information out there for you. Thanks.